Hello everyone, I'm Scott, and today in Standard Weekly we're going to look at new cards from Dominaria United. And in today's previews we're going to look at it specifically for Standard and what cards do I think will have an impact on the Standard format going forward. So let's get started. So the biggest surprise of the reveals from today was seeing Liliana of the Veil revealed. Liliana is one of the most popular modern staple cards for Planeswalkers. Her +1 ability, each player discards a card. Her -2 ability, target player sacrifices a creature. And her -6 ability, separate all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice. So Liliana I expect to see lots and lots of play, particularly in the Esper Rafine deck that I talked about in an article a couple weeks ago. She fits in nicely in replace of Lolth and gives a way for that deck to do quite a few things to push their game plan while hurting the opponent's game plan. Another area we might see her in is if Liliana and Obnixilis can work together. That's a possibility. We might see a deck built around the two of them to go forward in the Standard. But the biggest thing for anybody who's watching this, Liliana right now is about $70 if you're trying to buy it. So this printing is going to bring that price down a lot. So anybody who is interested in Liliana, not only for Standard, but for Pioneer or for Modern, has a great opportunity to get one. Our second Planeswalker of the day is Ajani, Sleeper Agent. We found out today in the Dominaria release video from Wizards of the Coast that Ajani has indeed been completed by the Phyrexians, and this version of Ajani does the following things. For +1, it reveals the top card of your library. If it's a creature or a Planeswalker card, put it in your hand. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So it gives some card filtering there. For -3, you distribute 3 +1/+ counters among 3 target creatures. They gain vigilance until the end of the turn. And for -6, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature or Planeswalker spell, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. And for those of you who aren't familiar with poison counters, if a player has 10 poison counters, they lose the game. So Ajani, if you can get him to the emblem, could very easily, over a few turns, get enough poison counters on your opponent to lead to them losing the game. Where does Ajani fit? Well, right now I'm not sure there's a deck that really wants Ajani, because this is going to be a deck that is heavily creature focused. And with Ajani being in white and green, right now we don't really have a shell that Ajani fits in well, but we have had in the past obviously the mono white deck, so this might be where Ajani Sleeper Agent might fit in with some green cards shuffled into the mix as well. So I think people will try to use him, but how successful we're going to see Ajani at this point, I'm not really sure. But it's a card that I think will see some play in Standard. Our next 2 cards are the Ravenman and Shealdred, the Apocalypse. So the Ravenman goes right in hand with Liliana. Okay, Liliana of the Veil wants to discard opponent's cards. The Ravenman wants you to have your opponent discard or discard cards in general. So at the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and this creature cannot block. So basically, if you activate Liliana of the Veil's plus ability, Ravenman at the end of your turn is going to create a 1/1 flyer. So every time you're plussing Liliana, Ravenman is going to give you a +1/+1 black bird creature token at the end of the turn. So I think that's a powerful ability to work in concert with each other there. And then we also have Shealdred. Shealdred, we've seen multiple Phyrexians over the past few sets. Now we see Shealdred, who is trying to conquer Dominaria. So what I think we'll see is this work very well with the Obnixilis card that we saw in our previous set in Streets of New Capenna, where that version of Obnixilis wants the opponent to discard cards, and with Shealdred, not only, so you're trying to limit the amount of cards in your opponent's hand, making them discard or losing 2 life, and Shealdred, when you draw a card, gives you 2 life, and when your opponent draws a card, they lose that 2 life. So every draw step, every time they're drawing a card, they're going to be losing 2 life, and you're also going to be potentially with Obnixilis and with Liliana working to reduce the number of cards in your opponent's hands to the point where they'll be taking 2 damage from Obnixilis anytime you activate Obnixilis' possibility. So Shealdred, I think, fits really well into that deck. And I think right now what we might see is a mono black / Rakdos deck form around Obnixilis, Liliana, and Shealdred that is going to push the idea of having your opponent discard cards, and the combination of the abilities on these 2 cards really pushes that deck to a place where there's a really good chance that this might be something that sees real legitimate play going forward. Our next set of cards are the pain lands that we've seen in the past. So we're getting a reprinting of all the pain lands from previous Dominaria sets. So we're going to get white blue, our white black, our green red, our blue red, our black red, and our green blue pain lands. And what my expectation is that once we get to the Brothers War, the remaining 4 pain lands will come into play. So what do these cards do? Well, they are one of the earliest forms of lands that come into play untapped but have a downside to them. And that's when you use the land as generic mana, it's colorless, it doesn't cost you anything. But if you use it for a blue mana or a green mana or a mana of the 2 colors that are on the card, then you lose 1 life. But I expect to see these cards all over Standard because good dual lands always see play. And these are good dual lands that we've seen throughout Magic's history. They go all the way back to the Ice Age cycle, and they've seen Standard play throughout. And I expect to see them all played again. Our next set of cards, we're going to look at some of the multicolored creature cards from today's release. So first we got Jora, Ageless Innovator. Jora is an interesting card because if you tap Jora, you put 2 Ingenuity counters on Jora, Ageless Innovator. Then you may put an artifact card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield, where X is the number of Ingenuity counters on Jora. Now, I think right now, not a great card, but we're going to see what we learned today is the next set, the Brothers War, is going to be artifact focused. And then we learned that we're going to be going back to Mirrodin for 2 sets. So we're going to see a lot of cards that are artifact based. So I think Jora over time is going to get better and better, and I think what we'll see is some artifact deck that will use Jora's ability to put bigger and bigger artifacts on the board for free, because that's the big thing here. You tap her once, you can put a 2 mana artifact on the field for free. You tap her twice, you can put up to a 4 mana artifact on the field for 3. You tap her 3 times, it can go to 6, and so on. So after a few turns, all you have to do is tap her, and you're putting an artifact card from your hand, basically any artifact almost in the game, onto the battlefield on your side. So I think that's going to be an important ability for her going forward. And we also have a few other artifact cards that are pretty good that we've seen from the previous sets, like Reckoner Bankbuster, that I think is going to work well with Jora, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time for that card to have a real home in Standard. So probably not Dominaria United season, but when we get to the Brothers War season and beyond that, I think that's where we're going to see it. Our next card is Zur Eternal Schemer. So Zur Eternal Schemer, Zur is an old character from the early history of Magic, and this Zur is interesting because it has in essence, it really wants you to play enchantment creatures. And obviously that set that we just got in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty has a lot of enchantment creatures in it, so this card looks like it was designed to work well with those cards. Now, the colors that we've seen the enchantment creature decks so far, they've been mostly green based. So the fact that Zur is white, blue, and black doesn't really fit well with that. So we'll have to see if we get some other enchantment creatures that will fit better with it. There are some that will fit with this theme, but we'll have to see if we get some other ones that'll be helpful to that. So right now, not sure if it has a place, but it does have interesting abilities that lead me to believe that it might. Because each enchanted creature or enchantment creature that you have gets Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. So it'll make it very difficult for those cards, once they have the Death Touch and Hexproof, to remove them from the field pretty easily, because you're going to have to put a creature in front of them basically at that point to kill them. And the interesting ability that Zur has is he can turn a target non-or enchantment you control into a creature. So you can turn, say, Hallowed Haunting, which is a 4-mana creature or 4-mana enchantment that every time you cast an enchantment spell, it creates a 1/1 spirit token. Well, you can turn that 4-mana enchantment into a 4/4 creature with Zur's ability. So it'll be interesting to see if we see Zur build a deck around these larger enchantments that cost 4, 5, 6 mana, or we see some enchantment creature decks that enchantment creatures from the current enchantment creature decks that we've seen in Streets of New Capenna Standard and Kamigawa Standard, if we'll see it with that. So our third legendary creature is Soul of Windgrace. A few years ago, we saw Windgrace as a character, again, that's deep in Magic lore and Magic history. Windgrace got a Planeswalker card in a commander deck a few years ago, and in the story of Dominaria, Windgrace sacrifices himself, and as a result of that, his spirit, though, is stored on Dominaria, and now that the Phyrexians are back, his spirit is going to return as a cat avatar. So what does this card give us? Well, it gives us an ability to discard land cards and then get a benefit from that discard. So whenever Soul of Windgrace enters the battlefield or attacks, you may put a land card from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. So Windgrace wants you to discard cards through its 3 discard abilities. So you can pay a green mana, discard a land, gain 3 life, no problem. When Windgrace attacks that turn, you get to put that land right back onto the battlefield. You can discard it to draw a card for colorless and a red, or you can, and that'll get you a card, or you can do it for 2 and a black, and Soul of Windgrace gains indestructible until end of turn, and tap it. So when Windgrace attacks, if it's going to die in combat, you can discard a land to protect it. Okay, and then again, next turn when you attack, you can again immediately bring that land back to the battlefield. Also from Streets of New Capenna, we got a number of land cards that are basically fetch lands that'll go fetch a basic land of a type of one of the 3 color shards that we saw in Streets of New Capenna. Those will work really good with Soul of Windgrace, because you can play them and crack them, get your basic land, it goes to the graveyard, now you've got a basic land in the graveyard, and that then can come back to the field with Soul of Windgrace's ability. Our next cards are in white. So we're going to look at a couple of color themes from today. And again, we're focusing on what I think we'll actually see play. So Archangel of Wrath, I think, is going to see some play, particularly if we get enough angels so that we can use the angels from Streets of New Capenna with some new angels, because there is an angel tribal deck that we've seen over the Streets of New Capenna season built around Giada. We're going to lose almost all of the angels that are in that deck, but Archangel of Wrath might be one to bring into it. It's got some interesting abilities. It's got flying, obviously, but also lifelink, And if you kick it, okay, meaning that you pay either a black mana or a red mana, which gives it some flexibility, you can deal 2 damage to any target. So if you kick it, it automatically creates, in essence, a shock, does 2 damage to anything. If you kick it twice, it'll do 4 damage, 2 damage to one thing, and then either 2 damage to something else or 2 damage to the same thing. So I think this might see some play if an Angel deck does come together. But again, it'll be interesting to see where it finally finds a home. Now, mono white might have found a new card to play and to help push that deck forward after rotation. Mono white has been a deck that has been very popular over the last year, and Guardian of New Benalia is a great card for that deck. Okay, Guardian has a new ability in list. So as this creature attacks, you may tap a non-attacking creature you control without summoning sickness. When you do, add its power to this creature's until end of turn. So you can attack with Guardian of New Benalia, and you've got another creature or that you don't want to attack with because you think it might die in combat, but you can add that creature's power to your Guardian of New Benalia. And when you use this enlist ability, you also get card filtering because you get to scry 2, and if the cards aren't things that you want, you can move them to the bottom of your deck, and hopefully the next card is one that you want. But it could lead you to move a card onto the top that would be 2 or 3 or 2 cards down. So that filtering ability, I think, in and of itself makes it an interesting card in Standard. But what makes Guardian of New Benalia, I think, very playable is the fact that you can discard a card, and Guardian of New Benalia gains indestructible until the end of turn. Typically, you would use this, you send Guardian of New Benalia into attack, and you use that ability afterwards. If it's going to die in combat, use that ability to give it indestructible, meaning that you can probably kill the opposing creature, but they can't kill yours. So I think it's very playable card. We'll have to find out where it fits in, but I think it's going to find a place possibly in the Boros aggro deck that we see, or in a mono white version of the deck. Moving on to red, we've got 2 cards to talk about, and the first is Lightning Strike. Thank God Lightning Strike is back. Red has been so punished over the last several years since Lightning Strike rotated out of the format. Red decks want the ability to deal 3 damage to a target, anytime they want to. And with the return of Lightning Strike, that would play with fire. Now we've got 2 good instant speed spells that you can do direct damage to your opponent with, and that's very important for the red decks. And that brings us to Squee, Dubious Monarch. Squee is a legendary creature who has been, throughout Magic's history, a featured character on the Weatherlight. And this version of Squee, Squee Dubious Monarch, is one that's going to not only give value to itself, but also continues to give you value every time you attack with it. So Squee has haste. Whenever Squee Dubious Monarch attacks, it creates a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. So every time you attack with Squee, you're getting 3 power on the board. If your opponent can't deal with the 1/1 goblin token, it starts to snowball, and you get more and more attacking creatures turn after turn. Now, if Squee were to die, you can recast Squee from your graveyard by paying 4 mana and exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard, and you can pay the 4, or you can exile 4 cards from your graveyard rather than pay its mana cost. So Squee is one of those cards that's sticky in the sense that it's likely to come back over and over again. And that's it for our Dominaria United spoilers for Standard for day 1. We'll see what we get tomorrow, but I think Standard is in a pretty good place. We got a lot of good, interesting cards, and I think we're going to see a very interesting and dynamic Standard season.